everybody to the library. My name is Annie Douthit, and I'm here on behalf of the Fishers Island Library Board and have the honor of introducing our event tonight. Thank you all so much for your support that makes it possible to bring programs like this to you. If you enjoyed tonight's program, please consider making a donation to help us continue. Our next event will be the Mystic Aquarium Marine Mammal Rescue next Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. And if you can see all of our events on fishersisland.net or on our website, filibrary.org. Tonight, we are happy to have Islanders Ace Ahrens, Ollie Scholle, and Ted Rogers share highlights and a pictorial tour of their walk along the Portuguese route of the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. Inspired while walking the fairways of the Harbor Club golf course, they, along with Mark Franklin, decided to try their hand at walking the centuries-old Camino de Santiago pilgrimage. Next up, they plan to do a 100-mile hike in the Dordogne region of southern France this fall with John Blondell and Chris Ball. And please, they welcome questions, but please save them all until the end.
All right. Thank you, Annie. So thanks all. Thanks for coming, and thank you to the library for this. Oh, I've got one of these things. It's not a pacemaker. It's a microphone. I thought I'd give you a little bit of the order of presentation, and then we'll just get into it. But first, multitasking on this island among those who live here year-round is the order of the day. Our leader, Ace, is the secretary of the fire department. He has to get to the monthly meeting in about 30 minutes. So if you see him leave, it's not because he's trying to avoid being here while you see the video of him dancing. Second teaser for that. So after just the order of presentation, Ace is briefly going to discuss or describe how he came up with this idea, because it was his idea. Then I'll give a little bit of the history of the Camino, which I'm doing with some trepidation because we have here Father Thomas Moore, who is in this, I think at least his third year visiting at Fishers Island for Our Lady of Grace. He runs Providence College as the chief operating officer, and he knows all, so I'm a little nervous about my history of St. James. But that'll be quick. Then any good Camino starts with an immersion in local culture. We immersed ourselves in Porto. And Ollie is going to give kind of a description of our time. We spent 4 days with a wonderful group of people, which you'll hear. And I should have mentioned already that Mark Franklin, our fourth, is not here. He's going to be on island, I think, relatively soon. But he's the one who introduced us to the Symington family and had us doing that. Then we'll go through the Camino a little bit with some images. And as Annie said, any questions you have, we'll consider and take under advisement. All right, so Ace, on to you.
Okay, I'll be brief as well. Several years ago, an old college roommate of mine went on this trip with a church group from St. Mark's Church in New Canaan and was raving about it. So I started to think about it, started to do some research, decided I wanted to do it. Ted's right. I talked to these guys at the Hay Harbor Golf Course, and by the 9th hole, they were in. Let's do it. A couple of weeks later, I ran into Mark Franklin. I barely got the words Camino out. He said, I'm in. So we had our 4. That was in the summer of 23. And then for logistic reasons, we're all busy. We really couldn't get this off the ground until October of last year. And did a lot of planning in advance, which we'll talk about gear and logistics and groups. Since I can't be with you at the end, I just wanted to add, if any of you are thinking about doing this, do it. It's fantastic. The camaraderie we had, the history, we did it at a certain pace. We were passing people were passing us. People in their 20s, people in their 90s. It's a fantastic trip, really worth it. I hope some of you will consider doing it. It's really, really a great venture.
All right. And what is it? Well, St. James was one of the 3 sort of central disciples. He was the brother of John, the evangelist. According to the lore, he was nicknamed Son of Thunder by Jesus. I hadn't realized Jesus gave a lot of nicknames, but witness transfiguration. He did travel to the Iberian Peninsula to be a missionary. He returned and was beheaded by Herod Agrippa in AD 44. His followers decided to return his body to Spain, and they came back to a town called Padrón, which we went through. It's called Padrón Rock because the rock on which the boat was tied up when his body was coming back is in now the church in Vidron. The scallop shell is the symbol of St. James. There are all sorts of different stories as to why. Some are that his body washed up on the shore covered with scallop shells, which seems a little strange. There's another thing about a horse that I really don't get. But the one thing that is interesting to me is, and we'll describe a little bit more, is there are many different Camino pilgrimage routes. It's not just one route. We took the one from Portugal that goes up basically about 10 miles inland and due north to Santiago de Compostela. But they come from France, from Barcelona, and all those lines coming to a central point is reminiscent of a scallop shell. So he was buried. They lost the location, according to legend. In 900 AD, some shepherds were out. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? But saw some stars in the sky, were led to a field, and Compostela, the field with the stars, and they found his remains. The cathedral was started in 1075. The current cathedral, which you'll see photos of, has a very Baroque exterior and interior, which date from the 1700s. So it became very early on a popular pilgrimage. It was really the first big pilgrimage. And as noted here, international law on the protection of pilgrims really came from people walking the Camino. However, in the Reformation, you can see this lovely quote from Martin Luther: "No one knows whether what lies in the apostles' tomb is a dead dog or a dead horse." Not a great sense of humor on Martin Luther's part, I think. But it started waning in popularity. It really, with the Reformation going on, when Sir Francis Drake was making his inroads into Spain, they hid the relics and they were lost until really the late 19th century. As this slide notes, by the early 80s, very few people were doing the pilgrimage. 423 did it in 1984. But then the president of the region of Galicia, which is the region in which Camino sits, was also the head of tourism for Spain. And he had an idea that this might be a good thing, to be blunt. And he rebuilt it. He signed up hotels, inns, bars to have stamps. The pilgrims have to have 2 stamps a day in their passport in order to get their certificate when they get to Santiago de Compostela. They promoted going beyond Santiago to the sea, as we did to Finisterre, end of earth. And so by last year, essentially 500,000 people got the certificates. Ace has framed his passport and his certificate, which you'll be welcome to take a look. Ace, anything on our logistics, the training, the gear?
Merino wool socks.
Here we go.
Wide-toed shoes, and as I mentioned earlier, there's so many different ways to do this. We ended up engaging a company called Portugal Green Walks, which sent our bags ahead and gave us GPS directions. There's some books here you can see that were very helpful, and arranged for our accommodations, and almost every place included breakfast. But we were ready to go when we were ready to go. We were all prepared.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
No blisters. We worked out.
And the order of the day generally for the walk was that we'd have breakfast. We'd start out about 8:30. Mark Franklin would go ahead of us about 3 times faster than we wanted to go, because he had some book on tape on his that he really was. He'd tell us about it every night, and it was a really dull book. But I can't. What was it? I can't even remember. But he was dead set. But then we got the routine, and the routine was he would go ahead of us, and then he would text back what cafe he was at for the mid-morning coffee, and the same for the lunch, and it was all very, very convenient. And the 3 of us lagged. There's just a little on our own background. Ace and Ollie went to Salisbury School. Mark and I actually grew up about 4 miles from each other, although he's a much younger man, so he doesn't know me. We didn't know each other well. On to Porto, Oliver. Mark Franklin's friends, the Symingtons.
Yes. So as Ted said, this was not about port when we started, and but it quickly became about port because Mark's friend Dom Symington his family, who arrived in port in 1882, are today the largest producers of port anywhere in the world. And they have some brands that you've all heard of: Wares, Dow's, Cockburn's. Coburn's, thank you. And so when we arrived to meet the Symingtons, they put on a 4-day extravaganza for us in Porto, and then up in the Douro Valley. This is the Graham's warehouse originally on the river in Porto, which is called, Ted, the Douro. No, that's the one up in the valley.
No, that's the Douro.
Same?
Yeah.
Okay. So we did a tour of Graham's. Here you can see a robalo, which are the flat bottom boats that they would bring the port barrels down from the Douro Valley. Here are the four of us.
You're going to have to see this a lot every morning. We take it.
And it seemed that the lineup always was in the same arrangement for some reason every morning. Don't go too fast here. I got some more.
Wearing a hat that said pot on it.
So here, Dom and Laura. The Douro Valley is enormous. It is a wine-growing region. It was the third region of the world to be given a protected status. The first was Chianti, and the second was Tocage. So it doesn't even talk about Bordeaux. The first was 1756, I think. Anyway, you can't be called port if it's not made in Portugal. The Australians, the Americans, lots of people make port, but that is where it originates. And it is a business that's been in decline for the last 20 years. The production numbers today are about $1 billion of port are sold around the world, but they're starting to go up. And they're trying to understand what is causing that, because it's a fairly unique sweet wine. It is a fortified wine. They add alcohol to it to give it a higher alcohol content. And as you probably all know, and you'll get to taste this evening, there are ruby ports, which are pretty much bottled and sold immediately. They don't get better with age. There are tawny ports, which are bottled after about, I think, 3 years, and can be and are not the final category, which are the vintage ports, which they cannot be drunk for between 10 and 40 years. So you have a choice. Most of the sales are ruby. People want to drink the port right away. Vintage sales are often to collectors. And just an interesting note, the oldest vintage wine you can buy today, oldest vintage port, was made in 1815. It is still marketed, and it's called Ferreira. So they hosted us in the valley at this is the Vesuvio. Vesuvio is a place, it's a vineyard, it's a wine, and it has its own grape crushing facility, which still exists in cement vats where you get in like Lucille Ball and tromp on the grapes. There it is. I think it's the last in the port-producing world. So there was a unique part of that too, Ted. You remember the windows in the back? Did you catch that?
Yeah.
So men and women would dance in here. They would be in there for hours crushing grapes. They bring them to little doors in the back along carriages, pour the buckets of grapes in, chomp, 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 chomp. But people had to get up at times and get out. So they had little, I don't know how to describe them, cavities with closets in front of them where the women or men could relieve themselves without actually leaving the area. It sounds awful, but it actually worked. I guess they just didn't want to stop the process.
All right. So this was our last night, and it was Ace's birthday, and they brought out a bottle of port of his birth year. Yeah, so it was like 29 years old or so. And in fact, at an earlier dinner, they brought out, apparently the most famous vintage is 1963. And they brought out a bottle at a family-owned restaurant for us, and the sommelier was kind of astounded.
And you can see Dom's entire family, his children, their families.
Lovely people.
They host us for 4 nights, increasingly interesting and fun events. And I'll leave the port story there. As you probably all know, the English love port. And they started drinking it in 1756. because they were at war with France and they got cut off from the French wines, so they started drinking port, and they're the largest consumers in the world. Let's go to Valenca.
So our first day, we took a bus up from, not a bus, a minivan up from Porto to Valença, which is still in Portugal, but just on the Minho River that separates Portugal from Spain. It's a walled city that was very interesting for night. We headed out every morning. We take a selfie. Now you might note we're relatively clean shaven there, so that's the first morning selfie. We crossing the Minho River Bridge.
If I may quickly, that bridge was built by Eiffel.
Oh, that's right, Gustav Eiffel. Right. And then España.
No, I don't think I've done.
The next day, there's not much. We ended up in a town called O Perino. As an example of how bedraggled O Perino looked, we had a nice lunch. We found a cafe. But as we were walking around, Mark said, do you think this got bombed in the war, in the Spanish Civil War? And I said, I don't know, maybe, because it was all just this awful cement post-war stuff. So a driver came to pick us up to take us to the hotel that was out of the town. And Mark, who has very good Spanish, asked the driver, was the town bombed in the war? And the driver looked and said, no, why do you ask? So that was O Perino. So the next morning, it was dark when we headed out to a lovely town called Arcade. These things are interesting. They're cribs. I mean, John McGillian's here, and he walked out. They're for corn or
they're corn cribs.
Crops?
You keep the rats in the cats.
Yeah. Anyway,
they're unique to Galicia. You see them everywhere. We pass 10 a day.
Yeah. Everybody in their backyard has a stone or a wooden
Spanish
crib.
symbol now.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we thought of bringing one back, but it didn't fit in the luggage. The weather was rainy for the first 5 or 6 days. It would rain, but it was off and on. It wasn't too hard. But you see, we spent a lot of time obsessing about gear. That's one thing about these trips. You can really amuse yourself with gear.
Most of the walking, by the way, was on either dirt or some roads, very few major roads. A lot of roads took us through small villages, but they were generally marked by these markers that the tourism board had put out. So it was rare that you could go astray. I don't remember if we ever did.
So, for example, this yellow arrow, the tombstone type thing that was on the cover of this presentation, there were many of those, and they have a kilometer marker in them, kilometers to Santiago. But also, often you just see the yellow arrow. This was leaving Arcade, which was a pleasant little town, our second night. And then we got to Pontevedra, which is a big town and one that Ace in particular liked.
Beautiful.
Nice cathedral.
It was recently in the New York Times. They did a story on Pontevedra having recaptured their city center, or the old town, and removed cars and all but pedestrian traffic. And it was a huge success, both for tourism but for the inhabitants of the town, too.
Ace decided
Will you gentlemen please speak up? You have a huge crowd.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
All right, I'll say. So Ace decided to surprise Jane by bringing her, for her collection of sand from various places. And here he is collecting the sand from Pontevedra. It turned out the ersatz sand was really stinky mud, and Jane disposed of it as quickly as possible.
I think half of it was poop.
This is the Cathedral of Pontevedra lit up at night, which is very nice.
Well,
now,
and that church is in the shape of a scallop shell.
Yeah, it's curved. So as to the food, Ace mentioned that it was great. Pulpo, octopus, is a staple. And we decided we had to go to the Casa Fidel o Pulpero in Pontevedra, mostly because Ali, in about the second day, said he can't stand pulpo. And we thought he deserved to go to a real pulpero, where Mark trolled over the waiter and said, again in Spanish, what on the menu other than pulpo do you have that's edibles for Ollie? And she said, pulpo. Pulpo. It's very good. All right, on to Caldas del Rey, still looking fairly good. Beautiful countryside. Now, the total from Valencia to Santiago is 83 miles. So this was 40 kilometers. We were getting there, and then on to Finisterre was another 55 miles. So the total was over 160 miles we walked. This was called us to Race, which was a pretty little town. The next morning to Padrón, which I mentioned, just nice countryside. Padrón, we stayed at the nicest hotel. This tour group is great because you can choose your level in the towns that have multiple hotels. Some, like O Perino, the bombed out place, only had one place. But this had a beautiful monastery that we stayed at. And then the next morning, you see where the shaving is getting a little more ragged. We were on to Santiago. So there's the marker. This is the cathedral. There's a huge courtyard plaza in front. That's the exterior. Unfortunately, there was some relay race, or not some foot race going on, so that stanchions are a problem. So here's the inside. They didn't stint on the gold. Beautiful. And then from the hill, it's an interesting cathedral because this is from the 1700s. These over here, that's from the 12th century. That's from somewhere in between, but they had different facades for different years. Not intentionally because of different years. It's just over the years they did this. There we are with our Fisher's Island banner. We met somebody along the way. This was if you get to Santiago, on that main square is a nice hotel that was originally the Royal Hospital. Oh. Underneath this restaurant is the former stables, and it was just a beautiful place. The hotel was nice too. Mark was thinking of changing from our hotel, but it was logistically inconvenient. So there we are after a lot of wine, so a lot of smiles. Now, once you're at Santiago, you can quit, but that seems wrong. And Ace thought it was wrong. Ollie thought it was wrong.
So a couple words on Santiago.
Oh, yes, yeah. Ollie.
First of all, Santiago, I'll move to the middle, yeah. So Santiago is the end, normally, of the Camino. As you'll see shortly, there's a map that shows the 5 routes converging on that city. But coming out of Portugal, it didn't give us enough days of hiking, so we added a spur off to the ocean to Finisterre, which Ted's about to show. But Santiago, and many people I met afterwards, they would ask me, was it spiritual? Did you actually feel that you were a pilgrim? And there were many times when we would pass individuals, lots of individuals who were hiking for exactly that experience, the pilgrimage. But I will say, as we came into Santiago the last day, it was our longest hike. I think it was 17 miles. We were tired. The last trip is all uphill, and it was pouring rain. And we got to a fork in the road. And Mark, as usual, was deep in his novel and far ahead, and he'd taken the fork to the hotel to take a shower, get warmed up before we arrived at the cathedral. The 3 of us reached the fork and had a debate. Wouldn't a hot shower be better? We can get ourselves ready and then go enjoy it. And both Ted and Ace were adamant, no, we're finishing at the church. We're finishing at the cathedral, and on we go. And so I, of course, went with them. And that was one of the most spiritual moments for me, is arriving in front of that cathedral in the rain and looking at that facade. And I'm saying, they were exactly right. This is how you want to end that phase of the Camino. So, but it was fun meeting other people along the way and hearing their stories and why they were doing this. Approximately 500,000 people travel the Camino every year. Now that sounds like a lot of people, but if you look at tourism in Barcelona, that's 17 million people who visit Barcelona. So this is relatively small in Spanish tourism. Spain is the 3rd most important tourist destination in the world after France and America. But this is the fastest growing type of tourism, or so-called ecotourism, versus some of the cultural tourism like Barcelona, where there's a strong pushback by the inhabitants of that city and others like Venice against tourism because it's overwhelming the housing stock. It's, Airbnbs are driving people, are making money for some families, but taking affordable housing away. So there is a strong reaction in that part of the world against tourism. But not in Santiago de Compostela. Final word on the town. There's a university there. It is in Galicia. It is an autonomous region. And we will continue now on to Finisterre, which in Spanish means end of the world.
Yeah. One thing that it's worth mentioning from when we were in Padrón, and I don't mean to make Mark the foil. Mark actually was a great addition to it because he's not here. He's paying the price. He liked to find a good restaurant, and we by no means objected to that. But he found by online research that there was a 1-star Michelin-starred restaurant outside of Padrón, about a mile outside. And these two, Ollie and Ace, were getting a little grumpy about this, and and I was in the middle. So they said, we just want to go anywhere. I don't want to walk out of town. I'd already made the reservation and used my credit card. And so I talked to Mark. Mark said, all right. Then I called them and they said that'll be €100 penalty per person. So even Ace and Ollie thought, well, we better go. So we started. It started raining. The route was down an industrial highway with trucks coming at us with those big mirrors we were dodging. We went by a burnt out strip club and a couple of auto dealerships. I mean, this was, we're thinking these two were about ready to kill Mark. And then there was a sign for the restaurant and there was a gate. And we opened it up, and it was absolute heaven. It was beautiful green lawn, and the people were nice, and the food was good. And they even found a car to take us back. We were walking because we couldn't get an Uber. There's no such thing. But anyway, so there's surprises to be had in all sorts of places.
One more thing that you may see a little more of in the second half. A lot of the trail, the path, or the way, was along Roman roads and across Roman bridges and Roman waterworks crossing streams. So there was a lot of history once you got into the countryside and you could see these little villages and these towns and the architecture. And then when you get to Santiago and you make a left turn to the coast, everything changes dramatically from there. All good, but very different, as we'll show you.
It becomes farmland. Here's one of these bridges. Negrera was a pretty town, but had no hotels. And kind of a funny thing, the travel agency worked they met us, took us to a lovely inn. We did our next day's walk. They picked us up and took us to the same hotel for the second night. But there were lovely churches. This was the Casa Folgo, the inn that we spent 2 nights in while we were walking. And it was spectacular. Just one, that we were the only guests. There was one woman who did the cooking, and she was just delightful. This was our next day.
We were very late in the season, so the numbers were way down. And at one stop where there was sort of a little grumpy bartender. It was a coffee stop, so he was serving us coffee. And I asked him, what's your favorite time during the Camino? He says, right now, when everybody leaves.
It reminded us a little of this island. So now we started to get a little goofy, and so here's a sign of our walking. This town.
Oh, that's Mark up ahead. Yeah.
It's not going to be heard. It's the theme to the TV show Rawhide.
After we say Village and Island 3 times.
Right. Yeah. So there's Mark up ahead, and the 3 of us.
Somehow we got into rolling.
Yeah. All right. So that's the same day. I think I was getting a little too interested in video. Ace decided to reenact Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music.
We didn't know the lyrics to that.
say how much port before the storm.
So on to another town. It became flatter. Well, not flatter. It opened up with fields and a lot of dairy farming, and a lot of flies because it was manure spreading time in the region. But it's still, as you can tell, the vistas were beautiful. Cows, dairy cow. Overoa was a small town, just a pit stop, but we went around. There's another one of the cribs as we headed off to a lovely town called C-E-E on the SEA. There's a wolverine that's the symbol.
No, that's a werewolf.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. You're right.
We couldn't figure out why they have a werewolf on a statue in this province, but apparently the werewolf was an important piece of their history.
Yeah.
And so we paused underneath it with a photograph of all of us, but I don't think we'll show you that. No.
This is the town of C, which we got to on Halloween night. And they celebrate Halloween there. There were a lot of people in costumes. And then that was our last night together. It's all very poignant. By this time, that's the best we can do for a beard after a few, 2.5 weeks. But and Ollie, he's a very modest man, particularly when it comes to doing the work of trying to find a restaurant. And but that night we said, all right, it's your job. You've got to find it, and you did it.
And they had no octopus.
Even though we were right on the water. So the last day, we got up super early and headed off to Finisterre, the last stop, because Mark and I had a car meet us to take us to the airport to go back to London. And here's Finisterre is a beautiful town on a half moon bay. And then you walk to the end to mile 0.0, which is here. There's the mile marker 0.0, and it's up on a hill. And there they are. And that, there we ran into two brothers, Japanese-American brothers who'd been out for 39 days, having started the French route, which is the longest and goes over the Pyrenees. They took our photo on this. And here are the routes. You can see how everything, wait a minute, hold on. That's Finisterre. Yeah. Where is Santiago?
Right where they all converge.
Yeah. No, this is Santiago. This is Finisterre. Yeah. So everything goes up. We were going this way, but the French route, the Francesi,
comes up over the Alps and is a real hike. That's where you're going up quite a bit of altitude on the way. So there's one from Sarria, from Spain this way. And then there's 2 routes from Portugal, maybe 3.
We started just down here. I mean, this shows you the size of what people can do. There's Pontevedra. We started about here. So
on the Portuguese
that's
border.
160 miles. So if you really want to go nuts. Now, I highly recommend if you get interested, particularly in the French route, which we are planning, if we stay healthy and the like, of doing next year. There's a movie called The Way with Martin Sheen, and his son Emilio Estevez directed it. That's the French route. It's a wonderful movie. It's got a nice dramatic story and some humor, but it just beautiful scenery of that route. And
so we'd love questions.
There we are, if there are questions.
We went pretty fast, but please.
Yes.